Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On today's show, I'm going to make a bold economic prediction, and it's not a popular one. I don't frequently make large predictions, but this one seems obvious to me. I haven't seen anything in the media talking about this as of yet. I believe that we will see a global recession in 2020. That's right. This year, 2020, is the year of global recession. And the trigger for this recession is the outbreak of the coronavirus that has the city of Wuhan in China as the epicenter. British Airways suspended flights to China today, and it remains to be seen if governments or other air carriers will implement additional travel restrictions. Air travel is one of the most effective methods for transmitting illness. You have a few hundred people in close proximity for several hours with a high percentage of recirculated air. The older the aircraft, the more the air is recirculated. Even if infection isn't transmitted on the aircraft, you have the possibility of infected persons exporting the disease to other parts of the world, making it much more difficult to contain. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 infected an estimated 500 million people and killed an estimated 50 million people. I mean, think about it. The world had just experienced the First World War and all of the horrors of that multinational conflict. It was the war to end all wars, and hot on the heels of that, along comes a strain of the H1N1 virus that killed another 50 million people. Back in 2003, the SARS outbreak killed an estimated 800 people worldwide, and it too had a high mortality rate. Were it not for concerted efforts to contain the virus, far more people would have died as a result. A few years later, in 2009, the so-called swine flu epidemic was another H1N1 virus. I actually caught the H1N1 virus traveling to Japan that year, and later that month, I traveled with my family to Europe. That 9-hour flight to Frankfurt was one of the longest flights of my life. I was so sick. I ended up going to visit a doctor in the town of Honfleur in Normandy, France. But remember, the world was already in recession in 2009. We were in the middle of the largest economic downturn since the Great Depression, so the impact of a downturn in global travel and leisure was hard to measure. It was just more bad news on top of a mud puddle of bad economic news. There are no official estimates. Some economists estimate that the impact of the SARS virus was somewhere between 0.5% of GDP and 1.5% of GDP. Here's what we do know. After 9/11, in 2001, travel on a global basis was hit pretty hard. It triggered a downturn in hospitality. People still took vacations at that time, but they were increasingly driving vacations that didn't involve air travel. In 2001, the global airline industry was weak and was already forecast to have somewhere between $1 to $2 billion in losses. And in the wake of 9/11, the industry losses grew to $11 billion. A portion of this was offset by government bailouts of the airline industry. Midway Airlines shut down, US Air went into bankruptcy, and United Airlines was on the brink of bankruptcy. The only profitable airline in the U.S. that year was Southwest, and in total, 13 airlines applied for relief from the U.S. government under the Stabilization Act. With the SARS outbreak in 2002 and 2003, the same thing happened. Travel numbers were down dramatically for leisure. Even business travel was restricted, and business people held more video conferences than ever before. At the time, video conferencing technology was not nearly as widely used as it is today. The biggest impact is to airlines, hotels, restaurants, resorts, and attractions like amusement parks. So here we are at the beginning of 2020. Several countries are working hard to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus. It's going to be at least 6 months before a vaccine is approved for use in humans, and still longer before it's manufactured and available in meaningful quantities. A lot can happen in the spread of the disease in 6 months. We already have 6,000 reported cases in Wuhan, an increase of 50% in about a week. We've got isolated cases in the US, Germany, France, Canada. The virus is now reported in 17 countries. Containment is vitally important to prevent a global pandemic. Key to reducing the spread of the disease is reducing travel to high-risk areas where the disease has already been reported. But since the incubation period is not well understood, the disease can be present in the population for a period of time and be undetected. The longer the incubation period, the greater the risk of the disease spreading unchecked. I believe the risks will certainly have the impact of changing travel patterns on a global basis. Vacationers will seek out destinations that have lower traffic and reduced human contact. I'm going on record as saying that 2020 will experience a global slowdown in the travel industry that will be sufficient in magnitude to push most major economies into economic recession, and this will have a ripple effect into other sectors of the economy. So you think about that. Have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.